What's your favorite video game soundtrack? Yeah, the one that teleports you back to those countless hours invested. I think I've dedicated slightly too much of my life only now to realize the true purpose was to answer this simple question. Which one has the best soundtrack? So today we're going to explore some legendary soundtracks, what makes them so memorable, and ultimately title the best video game soundtrack. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. But first we need to set some ground rules. To keep things professional, official if you will, I'll be judging based off a few different categories. Category number 1, the actual music itself. Funnily enough, who would have thought how well it's written and produced, nerdy music stuff, essentially. But don't worry, because category number 2 is how well does the actual soundtrack suit the game, so the context. So the soundtrack is usually made to convey a particular mood or environment, and how well does that suit the actual environment of the game itself. And finally, category number 3 is the emotion, the nostalgia aspect. Does it hit? Does it bring me back? There's something beautiful and maybe a little bit intangible about some of these that makes them so special, which is what I'll be looking for as well. Which brings us into soundtrack number 1. Oh my god, that brings me back. That choir is an absolute classic. So this is Halo, and the choir vocals is very synonymous with the game itself. It's a motif, some sort of hook or musical movement that is repeated over and over in multiple different ways. And this is just the classic Halo choir vocal sound, right? So now we've got the bongos, or the drums, the percussion, not dissimilar from like war or like marching band music, right? Which is very contextual with the game because it is a battle between species and between planets. And then you've got that like orchestral climbing melody, which is really good too. Builds up through this section, then goes into this double time section in here, sort of ramps up the energy and the suspense a little bit. I actually love the arrangement of this. Super triumphant, kind of over the top, but it's like purposeful and like meaningful and like makes sense with the game. I love the sort of pushes and the pulls in the rhythm there. It kind of pauses for a moment and then hits on the 2. It's such main character energy, which is really the goal. And they've achieved that. It sounds like you're specifically important and you've got the one role that is the difference between life and death. In terms of the musicality, I give it a 9. In terms of the context and how well it fits with the game, also has to be high. I give it an 8.5. It's very epic and it's very over the top, and that is the point, and they've done it well. In terms of nostalgia, emotion, it's got to be a 9. There's so many catchy melodies in there. So this one scores highly in my department. Let's move on to the next one. So this is Mario Kart. I'd be interested to know how many of you got that was the Mario Kart Rainbow Road Nintendo 64 version. It's a classic, but I also chose this for a few particular reasons. Number 1, they've kind of adapted a rhythm that is very synonymous to trance and more underground music, especially in the 90s, to a video game that seems very happy, and for me that seems quite creative. The bass line itself is very trance bass line, right? And then that tambourine in there is kind of like an offbeat hi-hat. Also very trance-oriented drum pattern. This one is also Mario Kart from a different console. See if you can guess it. This track is an absolute groove. You've got the really quick and glitchy hats, as well as that really quick ride there as well. This is a D&B rhythm, right? So similarly to the last track, this feels really creative to me because they've taken a genre and then adapted it to the Mario Kart world. Not to mention those stabs are incredible. It's such a catchy rhythm and it just works so well. It's sparkly and happy and makes you feel good, but it also feels like quick, like racing, right? Like energy. So this is the Mario Kart Wii. I think it's the menu selection music, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And there's no need for a kick drum in this case because it's intended to be background music. If you take the core rhythmic elements out, like the kick and the snare, then it sort of just sits underneath and doesn't draw too much attention to the actual track itself. So they've just taken the kick and the snare out and left the bass line to do all of the rhythmic stuff. And then of course the other percussion as well. If any of you are interested in how to make a bass line like this is what the SH-101 looks like. And it sounds to me like a square wave from the SH-101. So, right? So when it comes to scoring this is an interesting one because this track in particular ticks all my boxes. The musicality is really well done. It's inspired by what feels like kind of more underground genres taken into the Mario Kart realm, which is really creative and unique. So I also will have to give it a pretty strong 9 in this case. Category number 2, how well does it match with the game, the context itself? I would give it an 8 in this department. Emotion, does it bring me back? Of course it does. It's something beautiful about this track and the excitement that you get from like choosing your character before you start playing. Strong 9. That's going to be hard to beat. How do I make a soundtrack that sounds good? Well, I actually produced all of the music in this video myself, and it's all available in the description. It's designed to be a complete pack for every single mood that you'll need for an interesting soundtrack for your video.
Sounds like a subscription service.
No subscription required. I've also thrown in a mini crash course in sound and actually how to use the music itself. So again, check out the description if you're interested. For this next one, I'm gonna watch the video. I already love that bass synth. It sounds so retro and raw, as well as that harrowing reverbed pipe hit that is so ingrained in this soundtrack and makes it so good. So this already makes me laugh because it's hilarious how like cheesy this is. If we're taking it from our perspective today, I feel like the soundtrack was developed pretty low budget. The rhythm, the drums, and the bass are very programmed and robotic. It sounds fake, but that being said, it actually works incredibly well. Like, it's one of the beautiful things about music is you can do something that sounds quote unquote bad, but it can also work. And this is a perfect example of that. The actual drums and the bass line itself, very programmed. Have a listen to it. And then of course that guitar riff absolutely rips. And it also really suits the graphics and it suits how the game feels. So looking back, if you had a chance to redo this, I don't think that I would really want to change it. Maybe that comes into some nostalgia aspect of it. I really do think that the soundtrack kind of needs to be like this to reflect the actual context of the game. This is another favorite kind of popularized more recently by TikTok and whatnot, but always been a favorite of mine. It's the pause music. You know, when you're looking at your watch, this is the music that would come on, right? It's so good, so simple. It really doesn't do much in terms of like arrangement progression, but the slight different rhythm is really interesting. It's got a bit of an electro and a bit of a trap feel to it. And then you have the xylophone, which is playing that motif this time. But where does it score? Now, this is a really interesting one when it comes to the musicality because like we mentioned, it's kind of cheesy and very programmed and very robotic, but that also really works. But I think I have to keep that more in category number 2 and say that that is really well suited in terms of the context. But in terms of musicality and how it stands up today in a modern context, it's going to be a 7 for me. Category number 2, it really makes up for that. How well does it match with the game? Yeah, the actual soundtrack might be a little bit robotic and cheesy, but that actually really suits the environment and fits really well with the gameplay. So I got to give it a strong 9, maybe even a 9.5. And the nostalgia aspect is incredibly strong on this one. Strong 9 also. So this one we have a bit more of a classic D&B. It is a little bit slower style still, but you can tell it's very 90s sampled. So this is Need for Speed High Stakes. The reason why I've chosen High Stakes is because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that this soundtrack was entirely composed for this game rather than licensing songs that already exist, which is what they kind of did in later games. But it sounds very Need for Speed. It sounds very like kind of rebellious and grungy. There's lots of bass booms and quick breakbeat samples. I do think that there could have been something else here. I think this is like maybe a little bit static in this section. I really, really like the glitchy processing on the breakbeat samples as well though. Let's have a listen to this, also from the same game, Need for Speed. Now this one has a bit more energy, right? It sounds rebellious, it sounds grungy, it sounds like you're driving really fast, which is exactly what it's trying to achieve. I really like those atmospheric, airy pads that come in here, they're really nice. So slightly different style. In terms of the musicality, I personally really, really like it. But if I'm trying to keep objective, I think I gotta give it a 7. The context of the game, it's the character and the tones of the sounds that really puts me in that place. That rebellious, driving really fast, you're doing something illegal kind of space. In my heart, it's a 10. But it's a strong 7. Definitely hits with the nostalgia, but again, sits somewhere around the 7 mark for me. The one that everyone's been waiting for. We have Minecraft. I think the creativity of this is creating a soundtrack that doesn't feel like the game, but also becoming so entwined to the point where this is what makes the game. It's so important to the actual fundamental feel of Minecraft that the context rating on this one is both really high and really low at the same time, because to me, the actual mood of this seems like relaxing yoga studio vibes. That's the space that it's putting me when I'm listening to this. So maybe it has to score really extremely high on the nostalgia rating. But C418 has created something that is way different than what you would expect, but really, really works. So it's kind of hard to put this in the same category as all the other ones. Which brings us to the final point, what we've all been waiting for. Which one is going to be crowned the best video game soundtrack? This is gonna be hard. So when it comes to Halo, Mario Kart, Need for Speed, GoldenEye, and Minecraft, they all rate highly for different things and they all have a special place in my heart. GoldenEye is so famous and quickly became completely synonymous with the actual James Bond movie. Minecraft is kind of in a category of its own. Halo's taken inspiration from like those wartime marching band songs and it's very epic and triumphant. Mario Kart though scores highly on all of the categories, and for me this has to be the winner in this case, particularly because of this track right here. This has got to be one of my favorite tracks from all video game soundtracks. It has a really good arrangement and progression. They've taken inspiration from different genres like D&B and trance and made it into their own. We feel the nostalgia in these really deeply, and that's because it's really catchy, right? But the thing is, we need to learn that separately, and this video does not cover how to do that. So instead, you should watch this video here.